Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into an ancient text that frankly serves as a timeless masterclass on the extreme psychological burdens of servant leadership. Today, we're looking at the book of Numbers, specifically focusing on the Israelites' legendary 40 years in the wilderness. But rather than just reading this as a historical account, we're going to examine it through the lens of leadership. If you ever aspire to lead, well, you're pretty much setting yourself up for difficulties. And the text we're unpacking today is a profound, albeit somewhat sobering, study of exactly what happens when a leader faces relentless, compounding pressure. I mean, have you ever deeply regretted taking on a leadership role the second the complaints start rolling in? Listen to what Moses, the great liberator, says at one point when he's just utterly exhausted. He's been tasked with guiding a massive population out of Egypt, and instead of any kind of gratitude, he's met with an absolute wall of relentless negativity. It's a striking reminder that extreme difficulties are often experienced by the exceptional few who step up to lead. Moses is perpetually under attack here, and this raw, incredibly human moment shows us just how heavy the crown, or in this case, the shepherd's staff, truly is. To really grasp the intense psychological breakdown woven throughout this entire story, we first need to map out the actual wilderness journey. Because we aren't just talking about some theoretical burden, we're talking about a massive crowd of people navigating a truly brutal environment. This trek maps out the Israelites moving from their initial year of isolation at Mount Sinai straight up through the barren and dry wilderness of Zin. We're talking about a landscape that gets barely 2 to 4 inches of rain a year, populated by scorpions and lethal venomous snakes. They spend a huge chunk of time near the oasis at Kadesh Barnea. And later, after they're denied passage through Edom on the King's Highway, they're forced into a frustrating detour along the desert highway, eventually arriving at Mount Nebo. The sheer physical exhaustion of this route forms the perfect backdrop for the constant rebellions we're about to see. And that brings us right to the actual burden of leadership. You know what's fascinating? It's how incredibly fast the honeymoon phase ends, and the crushing weight of the crowd's expectations really begins. After establishing their covenant, taking a census, and building the tabernacle, they are finally on the march. But the unity, it doesn't last at all. Despite having daily manna literally sustaining them in this harsh desert, the people suffer from a contagious discontent. They start looking back at their time as slaves in Egypt with these weird rose-colored glasses. They're essentially demanding the ancient equivalents of fine dining. They want meat, they want delicacies, and they want it right now. The grumbling starts with just a few people, but it quickly infects every single family until they're all just wailing at the entrances of their tents. It's wild, right? It brilliantly illustrates how human nature so often ignores miraculous daily provision because we're too busy craving what we don't have. They literally call the life-saving manna miserable food. In response to this profound lack of gratitude, the narrative tells us God gives them exactly what they craved, sending in a massive flock of quail. But this comes with a very severe lesson. Their gluttonous indulgence in the quail actually leads to a devastating plague. It's a pretty stark reminder that getting exactly what you complain for isn't always a blessing. As if the crowd wasn't enough, the situation spirals into deep betrayal and paralyzing fear. The pressure on Moses cranks way up because the rebellion moves from the general populace right into his own family and inner circle. It's one thing when a massive crowd is angry at you. It is another entirely when your closest allies turn their backs. Here we see Miriam and Aaron, Moses' own sister and brother, initiating a challenge to his authority. Now, the text initially frames this as a complaint about Moses marrying a Cushite wife. But if you look closely at the core question they ask, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? You see the true motive. Disguised as a family or cultural critique, the real root of their betrayal is pure pride and middle management jealousy. They want the top spot. So how this gets resolved is the crucial point here. The text notes that God swiftly steps in to defend Moses, who was remarkably humble or perhaps just deeply afflicted and beaten down at this point, punishing Miriam with leprosy. But rather than gloating or saying, "I told you so," Moses immediately steps back into his role as a servant leader. He intercedes, crying out to God to heal her. Even when betrayed by his own flesh and blood, Moses places the well-being of his people way above his own ego. Shortly after that whole ordeal, Moses sends 12 tribal leaders to scout the Promised Land. 10 of them come back with an absolutely terrifying report. They describe these massive, fortified, late Bronze Age cities and giant inhabitants, famously claiming we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. This paralyzing fear from the scouting leaders completely infects the whole camp. The crowd even talks of stoning Moses and Aaron. Because they completely abandoned the mission out of pure fear, this specific generation is condemned to wander the wilderness for 40 years. With morale basically at rock bottom, we hit the Mutiny of Korah. The reality of a 40-year delay sets in, and we witness a full-blown mutiny. And this wasn't just a few angry voices, this was orchestrated by 250 well-known community leaders. Notice the breakdown of the factions here. This wasn't random chaos. This was highly calculated office politics. You have Korah, a Levite who already had a prestigious role, but he wanted the exclusive priesthood. Then you have Dathan and Abiram, who were Reubenites. Think about it. Reuben was the firstborn of Jacob, but his line lost those firstborn rights 400 years prior. So this whole thing is fueled by ancient tribal grudges and a burning desire to reclaim lost power. Together with 250 appointed council members, they form a massive coalition to overthrow Moses. To settle the dispute, Moses sets up a very clear test to prove his divine appointment. He challenges the rebels to present incense before the Lord. The text describes a highly decisive and terrifying result. The earth literally splits open and swallows Korah's men, and fire falls from heaven, consuming the 250 rebellious leaders. I mean, it is a dramatic, undeniable confirmation of Moses' leadership. But here is where we see an absolutely stunning display of human stubbornness. You'd think the ground literally opening up would settle the matter for good, right? Nope. The very next day, the surviving Israelite community approaches Moses and Aaron and grumbles, "You have killed the Lord's people." They blame Moses for God's unmistakable judgment. It is a staggering refusal to accept reality, and it triggers yet another deadly plague, which Aaron, as the true high priest, actually has to run out, intercede, and stop. All of this compounding, decade after decade stress, leads us to the leader's tragic fall. Let's move forward to Kadesh Barnea and see how this immense pressure finally breaks Moses. Because the truth is, even the most exceptional leaders have a breaking point. Once again, the people find themselves without water, and that familiar chorus of bitter complaints fires right back up. God gives Moses very explicit, simple instructions. Speak to the rock before the eyes of the community, and it will pour forth water. But an exhausted, deeply beleaguered Moses disobeys. Instead of speaking to the rock, he strikes it twice with his staff in a fit of immense anger. As he strikes the rock, Moses yells, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" Notice that word, we. In this moment of sheer frustration, Moses takes the credit for the miracle. By doing this and acting in rage, he completely fails to honor God as holy before the people. It is a tragic, singular misstep after decades of faithful service, and it's the very act that costs Moses his own entry into the Promised Land. It's a really powerful warning for any leader about the dangers of losing your composure and your integrity when the pressure is on. Even through all of this, the text points to an unlikely source of healing. As the desert wandering is finally wrapping up, the Israelites are forced to detour around Edom. The journey is incredibly long, and predictably, the people complain once more about the lack of bread and water. This leads to our final, deeply paradoxical lesson. In response to this latest rebellion, the narrative states God sends venomous snakes into the camp as judgment. The people confess their sin and beg Moses to pray for them, but God's remedy is highly unusual. It basically defies all logic. He doesn't just make the snakes disappear. Instead, God commands Moses to craft a bronze serpent and mount it on a pole. Anyone who gets bitten must look at this bronze snake to live. This brilliantly illustrates a profound paradox. The people must intentionally face the very image of their destruction, the serpent, in order to find their healing. It's an unlikely object of attention and a completely unexpected source of grace. This imagery is so foundational that Jesus actually echoes it later in the New Testament, comparing his own future crucifixion to this very moment of looking upon a symbol of death to find eternal life. As we wrap up this explainer on the heavy burdens of leadership, human rebellion, and unexpected grace, the central lesson is crystal clear. Leadership is a true crucible. The complaints will absolutely come, your inner circle might falter, and the journey will be arduous. So we're left to ask ourselves, when faced with the relentless, unyielding pressure of leading others, how will you navigate your own wilderness without letting the crowd's discontent break your integrity? How will you endure without striking the rock?